Now, for the longest time, children have been failing to read because of a whole language approach. There have been and still are people that think that children learn to read through osmosis, through a whole language approach. But science has proved them wrong. Hello and welcome to Blooming Curious, the podcast that's all about nurturing that natural curiosity and love of learning in our elementary children and students. I'm Edwina, your host, and I'm on a mission to keep children curious and excited about learning. The days of talk and chalk are over. We're exploring the strategies that create engaged, lifelong learners. So if you're a classroom or homeschool educator, or even a curious parent, looking for creative, meaningful ways to engage children and move beyond the traditional classroom approach, then this is the place for you. Hello and welcome to another episode of Blooming Curious. Today I want to talk about the power of explicit instruction. And if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you'll know that I am a big fan of inquiry-based learning, but you'll also know that I talk a lot about inquiry dovetailing with explicit instruction. As educators, we need a whole arsenal of strategies that we can draw upon for given situations. Let's talk today about learning to read. We want children to be curious, we want them to ask questions, and we want them to be able to find the answers to those questions. And to be able to find the answers to those questions, they need to be able to read. And if we want them to be able to read, which unlocks a whole world of knowledge and imagination, we need the correct tools and strategies to teach them to do that. Now, for the longest time, children have been failing to read because of a whole language approach. There have been and still are people that think that children learn to read through osmosis, through a whole language approach. But science has proved them wrong. As humans, we learn to talk from copying those around us. But reading is not something that we do naturally. We learn to read by being taught to read. To be taught to read effectively, we need to learn how to decode the symbols and clusters of symbols that we see on a page. In other words, the graphemes or the letters of the alphabet. The science has been very clear. For children to learn to read effectively, they need daily, systematic, explicit instruction. And explicit instruction is telling kids exactly what they need to know and then giving them opportunities to practice what they've just learned. Think about it this way. If you want to teach someone how to cook or bake, you model and you show them the process step by step. You show them exactly how to accurately measure using measuring cups or a scale. And then you show them what it means to fold or to whip or to saute. You don't just leave them to it. They don't know how to do that. Then they have a go and they repeat the process several times until it becomes automatic, until it becomes easy and natural for them. And it's the same with reading. We need to explicitly teach children the individual sounds in the language. The letter or the grapheme A is a symbol that represents the A sound. The two letters together make one sound. It's like a digraph, we call those. And when you see, for example, an AY in a word, it represents an A sound. And along with that, you teach them the rule that AY is always at the end of a word. So it helps them to decode. The minute they see AY, they know A. Teaching children the relationship between letters and their corresponding sounds is what we call phonics. And it is essential that we teach phonics not only well, but systematically and daily so that it becomes embedded and automatic for children. When they see that letter B, they should immediately know that the sound associated with that letter is B. Simultaneously, we need to develop children's phonemic awareness, and this is when children can identify and manipulate the sounds in words. To develop phonemic awareness, we provide and focus on activities where children can identify the sounds, not the letters, but the sounds in words. So, for example, if you say the word dog, then you might say, "What sound do you hear at the beginning of the word dog?" And the child should respond with D. Then later on, you might say, "What sound do you hear at the end of the word?" And the child should respond with G. And later on, you might say, "What sound do you hear in the middle of the word?" And the child will say, "Oh." Now, when you play with those sounds, you'll do phoneme substitution and deletion. So you'll say, if I take away the D in dog and I put a L instead, what do you hear then? And the child will say, log. Similarly, you can play with end sounds. And if you say, if I take away the G in dog and I put a T, what will the word be then? And the child will say, dot. Phonemic awareness should start early, simply by reading lots of rhymes to children, getting them to give you words that rhyme. So you could say, "Give me a word that rhymes with dog." And they might say, mog. And that's perfectly acceptable because we're simply teaching them how to recognize the sounds in words. And when it comes to teaching phonemic awareness, there are many parts. But the place to start is with wordplay. That's your rhyming. That's the sounds you hear in words. But you also want children to understand syllables, because that's going to be important later when they're learning to spell multisyllabic words. Syllables are something that you do every day. You just include it for a few minutes every day, or just accidentally in your day-to-day activities. You might say, clap the syllables for the word carpet, or whatever the word is. I often used the children's names and then also words associated with whatever we're learning about in science, for example. Then you focus on onset and rhyme. That comes next, the breaking apart of syllables, and later on segmenting and blending. So in going back to the word dog, once children can identify the individual sounds or the individual phonemes, then you start putting them together. That's when you sound out D, O, G, and they blend those sounds together and you hear dog. And you're still not writing. You're still doing your pre-writing skills, and you're developing their fine motor skills, and you're developing their pencil grip, and you're giving them lots of activities that build those muscles, including gross motor activities. But you're still just playing and recognizing sounds. You can use magnetic letters, you can use sound dominoes, you can play games where you fish out pictures that start with a sound, for example. Or you match pictures to letters that represent the beginning sounds. This is what we call intentional playful learning, where you'll set up activities that are play-based and have a purpose of teaching the child something, in this case, letter or sound recognition. But it's important to remember that these play experiences come after you've explicitly taught your phonics. So explicit teaching means the I do, we do, you do model. So first you teach them that when you see this letter and you hold up the letter D, for example, it makes a D sound. Then you might use flashcards, and altogether the children repeat the sounds and then they practice the sound on their own. Perhaps they'll draw 3 things that start with a D sound. And if they feel like having a go at sounding out a word of their drawing and writing it, they can. Otherwise, they just tell you what the picture is that they've drawn and you write it. But as you write it, you model and you sound out each individual letter so that they start to see how these things work and they start to make connections between writing and letters and sounds. Now, I use flashcards, which included the letter name, like a D, for example, its sound, D, and an associated movement. And often I would see children writing and sounding out words, and you'll see them doing the action because that helped them remember the sound. These phonics lessons were quick, 10 to 15 minutes max, but they take place every single day. And they were also at pace, not slow, at pace, because that ensures that there is no time for boredom. They were quick, so kids needed to focus. And then after that, you'll have activities in small groups that children rotate through over the week that gave them opportunities to practice identifying and manipulating the sounds in words. And once children started writing, then you would get out your little mini whiteboards and children can practice as part of the phonics lesson. That's the we do part. So that's where I would say the word dog and they would write it down. But I wouldn't just say dog, I'd say dog or eventually just dog and they would write it down. And this is a powerful approach because you can see straight away who was successful and who still needed more help and practice. And after that phonics lesson, you pull out those kids that you saw needed more help and you give them some more explicit instruction and more time to practice. Children are successful readers when they have strong phonological awareness and are able to manipulate the sounds in words. And by the way, when children can do this, they can even read nonsense words, which essentially means that once they have these skills, they can read any word provided they have been taught all the letter sound combinations. As early childhood teachers, our responsibility is to ensure that children leave our classroom with these foundations well established so that we can open up a world of exploration and imagination to children. Because once we give them the gift of reading, then you also give them the gift of independence. And that's when they are able to use the skills of reading and comprehension to go off and read about things that interest them and eventually participate in inquiry and project-based learning. And this is why I say that inquiry and explicit instruction dovetail with one another. We need both strategies in our classrooms. Explicit instruction to teach them what they don't know and give them the tools and strategies that they need to be able to read and solve mathematical equations. But then we simultaneously need to get them curious and interested in learning by marrying these two strategies together. We give children the best chance to succeed, not only at school, but in life. Now, I have created a resource for you that shows you in a step-by-step way how to integrate inquiry into existing lessons. You can get that at resources.bloomingcurious.com/inquiry_101. And I've written a blog post in 2 parts on how to teach a child to read. I will link both of these in the show notes for you. So, if you want to know how to effectively and explicitly teach a child to read and be curious and love learning, you need to do 3 things when this episode ends, which is in less than a minute. 1 is read the blog post, which I have written in detail, breaking down the process very easily for you of how a child learns to read. 2, I also would like to draw your attention to a fantastic book called Explicit Direct Instruction, The Power of Well-Crafted, Well-Taught Lesson. It's by Hollingworth and Ybarra, and that is in my shop, and I'll leave a link to that in the show notes too. And lastly, get my free e-guide that shows you how to integrate inquiry into your existing lessons. I'll leave all 3 of these links for you in the show notes. Thanks for choosing Blooming Curious to listen to today. And if you enjoyed this episode, I'd love you to spread the word. Just click on the share button and send it to someone you know. And make sure you subscribe so that you're notified when a new episode is published. And until next week, take care and stay blooming curious.